My name is Erin. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought I'd be the person to almost cancel my own brother's wedding. But when his wedding planner called to tell me my family had uninvited me while keeping my $65,000 deposit, something inside me shifted. I'd spent my whole life being the good daughter, the supportive sister, the one who never asked for anything in return. That phone call changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take a turn nobody saw coming. Let me start from the beginning. Growing up in a middle-class family in Texas, I always knew my place. Derek was 4 years older than me, and from the moment I could understand family dynamics, I realized he was the golden child. Our father Harold worked as an engineer at a manufacturing plant, pulling long hours to keep us comfortable. Our mother Patricia had been a high school teacher before retiring early to focus on family. They were good parents, don't get me wrong, but there was always this unspoken hierarchy. Derek could do no wrong. His struggles were met with sympathy and support. Mine were met with expectations that I'd figure things out on my own. I learned early on to be self-sufficient. When Derek needed help with college tuition, Mom and Dad stretched their budget to cover it. When I needed the same help 2 years later, they told me about student loans and part-time jobs. I didn't resent it, not really. I just accepted it as the way things were. So I worked my way through university studying finance while waiting tables on weekends and tutoring other students for extra cash. I graduated with honors and landed a position at a financial consulting firm in Dallas. It wasn't glamorous at first, but I was determined to build something for myself. 10 years of dedication later, I'd climbed to senior financial consultant. My salary had grown to around $150,000 a year. I lived modestly in a one-bedroom apartment, drove a reliable but unremarkable car, and invested most of what I earned. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted financial security, something I'd never really felt growing up. Meanwhile, Derek bounced from job to job. He'd tried sales, then marketing, then briefly considered becoming a real estate agent. Nothing stuck. He still lived in our hometown, still relied on Mom and Dad for help when rent was tight or his car needed repairs. 2 years ago, everything seemed to change for Derek. He met Stephanie through a dating app. She was 29, worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm, and had the kind of polished appearance that photographs well. Long dark hair, perfect makeup, designer clothes that probably stretched her budget. When Derek first introduced us at a family barbecue, I was genuinely happy for him. He seemed more stable, more focused. Stephanie smiled at all the right moments and said all the right things to our parents. Mom was thrilled. Dad seemed relieved that Derek finally had some direction. I tried to build a relationship with Stephanie. I really did. I invited her to lunch when I visited home, sent her thoughtful birthday gifts, asked about her work and interests. But every interaction felt like pulling teeth. Her responses were polite but cold, her smiles never quite reaching her eyes when she looked at me. I told myself she was just reserved, that some people take time to warm up. I kept trying. 6 months before the wedding that would change everything, Derek called me on a Tuesday evening. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone lit up with his name. His voice had that nervous energy I recognized from childhood, the tone he used when he wanted something but didn't know how to ask. We made small talk for a few minutes before he got to the point. He and Stephanie were engaged. They wanted to get married in 8 months. They'd found the perfect venue, a place called the Rosewood Estate, just outside the city. It was everything Stephanie had dreamed of, he said. Rolling lawns, a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers, gardens that would be perfect for photos. There was just one problem. The total cost was going to run about $120,000. Mom and Dad had offered $30,000, which was generous given their retirement savings. But that left $90,000 that Derek and Stephanie didn't have. Derek had just lost his job 3 months earlier and was doing freelance work that barely covered his bills. Stephanie's salary was decent, but she had student loans and credit card debt. I could hear the desperation in his voice as he explained all this, as if I didn't already know his financial situation. Then came the question I'd been expecting since the call started. Could I help? He didn't specify an amount. He just said anything would mean the world to them would help make Stephanie's dream wedding a reality. I sat there in my quiet apartment looking at my own financial spreadsheets on the screen. I'd been saving for years, building a cushion for myself, maybe eventually buying a house. But this was my brother, my only sibling, and despite everything, I loved him. I told him I'd think about it and call him back. That night, I ran the numbers. I could afford to cover the venue cost without destroying my financial security. It would hurt, but it wouldn't break me. More than the money, I thought about what it might mean for our family. Maybe this could bring us closer. Maybe helping Derek in this huge way would show him how much I cared, would bridge whatever gap had grown between us over the years. Maybe Stephanie would finally see me as family instead of an outsider. I called Derek the next morning and told him I'd cover the venue cost. The deposit was $65,000 with the remaining $20,000 due 2 weeks before the wedding. I'd handle both amounts. The silence on his end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he exhaled and I could hear the relief in his voice. He thanked me over and over, said he'd pay me back someday, said Stephanie would be so grateful. I told him not to worry about repayment, that I wanted to do this for him. That was my first mistake. The following week, we all met with Stephanie's chosen wedding planner. Courtney ran her business from a sleek office in downtown Dallas, all glass and minimalist furniture and tasteful flower arrangements. She was probably in her early 40s, impeccably dressed with the kind of efficient professionalism that made you trust her immediately. Derek, Stephanie. Mom, Dad, and I sat around her conference table while she walked us through timelines and vendor options and design concepts. Stephanie dominated the conversation. This was her vision, she kept saying. She knew exactly what she wanted. Courtney took notes and nodded occasionally, asking clarifying questions. When we got to the financial discussion, Stephanie turned to Courtney and said matter-of-factly that Aaron would be handling the venue deposit. Not asking. Stating. As if it had already been decided without me, as if my role was simply to write the check. Courtney glanced at me for confirmation. I nodded, feeling heat creep up my neck. The way Stephanie said it made me feel less like a sister helping family and more like an ATM machine that happened to be related to the groom. 3 days later, we toured the Rosewood estate. It was undeniably beautiful, the kind of place you see in wedding magazines, all manicured gardens and elegant architecture. Stephanie practically glowed as we walked through the grounds. She stopped every few feet to take photos, already imagining her perfect day. The event coordinator showed us the grand ballroom, the terrace for cocktail hour, the garden pavilion they used for after parties. It was the complete package, the most expensive option Rosewood offered. When we sat down to finalize the contract, the coordinator laid out the payment terms. $85,000 total. $65,000 due immediately as the deposit, $20,000 due 2 weeks before the event. Standard cancellation policy, all the usual clauses. Then Derek turned to me and said almost casually that he didn't have his checkbook with him. Could I handle the paperwork? I should have said something then. Should have asked why his name wasn't going on the contract at all. But everyone was looking at me, and Stephanie was still riding high on the excitement of securing her dream venue, and I didn't want to be the one to create awkwardness. So I signed my name on the line marked Primary Financial Guarantor. I transferred $65,000 from my savings account right there, watching the number on my phone screen drop as the transaction processed. Stephanie hugged me and said thank you, but her arms barely touched my shoulders, and her voice had that same hollow quality I'd noticed before. Derek just squeezed my arm and said he owed me one. I tried to feel good about what I'd just done. Mostly, I felt tired. Over the next few months, I waited for my invitation to be involved in the wedding planning. It never came. When I asked Derek about the dress code for guests, he told me Stephanie was handling all that and I should just wait for details. Weeks passed. I still hadn't received a formal invitation in the mail. I'd seen other family members posting on social media about receiving their beautiful custom invitations, but my mailbox stayed empty. One afternoon, I called Derek to ask if maybe mine had gotten lost. He assured me it was probably just delayed, that the invitations had been sent out in batches and mine would arrive soon. His tone suggested I was being paranoid. I tried to believe him. Another month went by. Still nothing. I brought it up again more directly this time. Derek sighed and said Stephanie was really stressed about the planning and I should cut her some slack. He promised to check on it. Days later, he sent me a text saying my invitation must have gotten lost in the mail, but obviously I was invited. I was family. The word family started to feel hollow. I tried reaching out to Stephanie directly, asking if there was anything I could help with. Shopping for decorations, addressing envelopes, literally anything. She replied hours later with a brief message saying she had everything under control and her bridesmaids were helping with the details. That's when I realized I hadn't been asked to be a bridesmaid. I hadn't expected to be maid of honor. That spot clearly belonged to Stephanie's best friend from college. But not being included in the bridal party at all stung more than I wanted to admit. I called my mother, trying to frame my concerns without sounding petty. Mom listened patiently, then gently suggested that Stephanie had the right to choose whoever she wanted in her bridal party. Modern weddings were different, she said. Not everyone included their siblings' partners or siblings' siblings. I pointed out that I wasn't a random relative, I was Derek's only sister. Mom's response was careful, measured. She said that sometimes daughters-in-law needed space to create their own family dynamic, and I should respect Stephanie's choices. The underlying message was clear. Don't make waves. Don't be difficult. This isn't about you. But it felt like it was becoming about me, or rather about my absence. 6 weeks before the wedding, I was at brunch with my friend Laura when I scrolled past a post on Instagram. One of Stephanie's friends had shared photos from what appeared to be a bridal shower. There were at least 20 women in the pictures laughing and opening gifts, surrounded by elaborate decorations in rose gold and white. I hadn't known there was a bridal shower. Nobody had mentioned it to me. I set my phone down and tried to focus on what Laura was saying, but she'd already noticed my expression. She asked what was wrong. I showed her the photos. Laura, who'd known me since college and had never been one to sugarcoat things, looked at the screen and then at me with genuine concern. She asked if I'd been invited. I shook my head. Laura's next question was blunt. Had I really paid $65,000 for a wedding where I wasn't even invited to the pre-wedding events? When she said it out loud like that, the situation sounded absurd. Insulting. I made excuses. Maybe the shower was just for Stephanie's close friends. Maybe it was a surprise and Derek hadn't known about it either. Laura wasn't buying it. She said I needed to talk to Derek, needed to figure out what was actually going on. I promised I would. That evening I called my brother. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. I asked him about the bridal shower. There was a pause, then he said it had been a last-minute thing organized by Stephanie's maid of honor. He claimed he'd only heard about it after it happened. I asked why nobody had thought to include me. Another pause. Then Derek said in a tone that suggested I was being unreasonable that Stephanie and I weren't really close, so it probably hadn't occurred to anyone that I'd want to be there. The words hit me like cold water. I'd spent months trying to connect with Stephanie, and apparently it hadn't mattered at all. I was just the woman who paid for the venue, not someone who deserved to be included in the celebration. I told Derek that hurt. He sighed, that same exasperated sigh Dad used to make when I asked for things as a kid. He said I was being too sensitive, that this was Stephanie's day, and I should try to be supportive instead of making it about myself. I wanted to scream that I'd been nothing but supportive, that I'd given them $65,000 without asking for anything in return. But I kept my voice steady and asked a simple question. Was I going to be welcome at the wedding itself? Derek's response came too quickly, too rehearsed. Of course I was welcome. I was family. He had to go. Stephanie was calling on the other line. He hung up before I could say anything else. 3 weeks before the wedding, I went to my parents' house for Sunday dinner. When I arrived, Mom and Dad were at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. Mom looked up and smiled, but there was something strained about it. I asked what they were working on. Dad said they were helping finalize the seating chart. My chest tightened. I asked if I could see where I was sitting. Mom exchanged a glance with Dad. She said Stephanie was still making adjustments, that the chart wasn't final yet. I pressed. Were any of my cousins from Mom's side invited, the ones I'd grown up with who'd always been at every family gathering? Dad cleared his throat. He said the guest list had gotten complicated, that Stephanie wanted to keep the wedding intimate. Only about 200 people. I did the math in my head. 200 wasn't intimate. That was a substantial wedding. So why weren't my cousins included? Mom said something about venue capacity and Stephanie's large extended family. The subtext was clear. Stephanie's people took priority. I felt something crack inside me. I'd paid for a venue that could hold far more than 200 people, and somehow my own family members weren't making the cut. I stood there in my parents' kitchen, the smell of Mom's pot roast filling the air, and realized I'd been systematically erased from this wedding while my bank account had been fully included. I didn't say anything else about it that night. I ate dinner, made polite conversation, and left as soon as I reasonably could. 2.5 weeks before the wedding, I still hadn't received a formal invitation. I texted Derek. No response for 6 hours. When he finally replied, it was brief. He said I shouldn't worry about the physical invitation, that obviously I knew when and where the wedding was happening. I texted back asking what I should wear, what the dress code was for family. He said cocktail attire. Nothing more. No details about timing for family photos, no information about whether there was a rehearsal dinner I should attend. Just 2 words. Cocktail attire. I tried one more time to reach out to Stephanie directly. I sent her a message saying I was excited for the wedding and asking if there was any last-minute help she needed. She read the message immediately. I could see the read receipt. 3 hours later, she responded, "Thanks, but we're all set." 4 words. That was it. I put my phone down and stared at the wall of my apartment. I'd spent $65,000 and countless emotional energy trying to be part of this family moment, and I'd never felt more excluded in my life. The Monday of wedding week arrived. 5 days until Derek and Stephanie would say their vows at the venue I'd paid for. I was at work trying to focus on a client presentation when my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but years of conditioning made me pick up. Mom's voice was cheerful, asking if I was ready for the big day. I said yes, though I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be ready for since I still had no details. Mom seemed to miss my sarcasm. She launched into a description of her outfit, what Dad would be wearing, how excited they were. Then she mentioned that Derek and Stephanie were finalizing some last-minute guest list changes. My stomach dropped. I asked what kind of changes. Mom hesitated, then said that Stephanie wanted to make sure the day was perfect, which meant keeping things small and intimate. I reminded her that 200 guests wasn't small. Mom's voice got quieter. She said she had to go, that Dad needed help with something. She hung up before I could push further. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed scrolling through social media, torturing myself with photos of Derek and Stephanie's wedding countdown posts. They looked so happy, so excited. All the comments were congratulatory heart emojis and exclamation points. I was happy for my brother. I genuinely was. But I was also deeply, profoundly hurt. And I didn't know what to do with that feeling. Wednesday morning, 3 days before the wedding, I was on a coffee break at work when I ran into Marcus. We'd met at an industry conference 2 years ago and had stayed friendly occasionally, grabbing lunch when our schedules aligned. Marcus worked for a competing firm, but had started doing some event planning on the side through his partner's business. We chatted about work for a few minutes before he mentioned that he'd heard my brother's wedding was this weekend. I was surprised he knew about it. Marcus explained that he'd run into Courtney, the wedding planner, at a vendor showcase the previous week. They'd talked shop, and Courtney had mentioned the Rosewood Estate wedding. Marcus said it sounded incredible that Courtney had been excited about the scope of the event. Over 200 guests, full estate package with the terrace ballroom and garden pavilion. It was going to be one of the biggest weddings Rosewood had hosted all year. I must have looked strange because Marcus asked if I was okay. I forced a smile and said I was fine, just stressed about work. But my mind was reeling. Full estate package. That wasn't what we'd discussed during the initial booking. The full package cost significantly more than the $85,000 price point we'd agreed on. Had they upgraded without telling me? Was I going to be expected to cover additional costs? And more importantly, if they were using the entire estate for 200-plus guests, why was I being told there wasn't room for my extended family? Marcus kept talking, mentioning details about the cocktail hour setup and the elaborate dessert display Courtney had described. Every word made my chest tighter. This wedding had grown into something far beyond what Derek had originally asked for help with. It was Stephanie's dream wedding, all right, built on my money without my presence. Marcus eventually noticed my distraction and asked again if everything was okay. I lied and said yes. We parted ways and I went back to my office and closed the door. That afternoon, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called the Rosewood Estate directly. The receptionist answered with practiced cheerfulness. I identified myself as Aaron, the person who'd paid the deposit for the Derek and Stephanie wedding. I said I needed to confirm some final details. The receptionist put me on hold, and soft classical music played for what felt like forever. When she came back, she transferred me to their events coordinator. The coordinator remembered me from the initial booking. She asked how she could help. I kept my voice steady and professional. I said I wanted to verify the final guest count and the package details. She pulled up the file. 215 confirmed guests, she said. Full estate package with ceremony in the garden cocktail reception on the terrace dinner and dancing in the grand ballroom after party in the pavilion. Everything I'd feared confirmed. I asked about the total cost. She said the final invoice would be $92,000, $7,000 more than the original quote. My hands shook as I held the phone. I asked when the additional $27,000 payment was due. She said it should have been received already according to their payment schedule, but they had a note that an extension had been granted until 1 week before the wedding. That meant it was due in 3 days. I asked if Derek or Stephanie had contacted them about payment. The coordinator said she couldn't discuss other clients' financial matters, but that she was sure everything would be handled smoothly since I was listed as the primary guarantor. I thanked her and hung up. For 10 minutes, I sat in my office chair, staring at nothing. Then I called Derek, straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text. Are you planning to tell me the venue cost increased by $7,000 and you need $27,000 more from me in 3 days? 3 hours passed. No response. I called my mother. She answered, sounding rushed. I asked if she knew about the additional costs. Mom said she didn't handle the wedding finances that was between Derek, Stephanie, and me. I said I'd never agreed to pay more than the original amount. Mom's voice got tight. She said I shouldn't nickel and dime my brother on his wedding week. That evening, Derek finally texted back. Sorry, busy day. What's up? I called him immediately. He answered, and I heard voices and laughter in the background. I asked where he was. He said he and Stephanie were at a pre-wedding dinner with her family. I asked why I wasn't invited to that either. He said it was just Stephanie's side, nothing personal. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake him. Instead, I asked about the venue costs. The line went quiet except for the background noise. Derek said he'd been meaning to talk to me about that. Stephanie had made some upgrades to make sure everything was perfect. The flowers alone were costing an extra $3,000. The menu had been enhanced. They'd added the garden pavilion for an after-party. All necessary expenses, he said, for the wedding Stephanie deserved. I asked who was paying for these upgrades. Derek said he'd hoped I'd understand and cover them. After all, I'd already invested so much. I closed my eyes. I asked how much he expected me to pay in total. Derek got defensive. He said nobody was forcing me to do anything, that if I wanted to back out now and ruin his wedding, that was my choice. His words were like acid. I'd spent $65,000, been excluded from every aspect of the planning, hadn't even received a formal invitation, and now he was acting like I was the problem for questioning another $27,000. I told him I needed time to think. He said there wasn't much time, that the venue needed payment. Then he hung up. I sat in my apartment that night, feeling more alone than I'd felt in years. My friend Laura called, sensing something was wrong. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, her response was simple. She said I needed to protect myself. That family or not, what Derek and Stephanie were doing was manipulation and financial abuse. She said if I didn't stand up for myself now, this pattern would continue forever. I knew she was right, but knowing and acting are different things. Thursday arrived, 2 days before the wedding. I woke up to a text from my mother. Please don't cause drama this week. Derek deserves his happy day. I stared at that message for a long time. Not once did it occur to anyone to ask if I deserved respect, if I deserved to be treated like family instead of a checkbook. I didn't respond. I got ready for work mechanically, my mind spinning with scenarios and possibilities, and the weight of too many years of putting everyone else first. At lunchtime, I made a decision. I called Courtney's office directly. I needed to understand exactly what my legal position was regarding the venue contract. The receptionist put me through. Courtney answered, her voice professional as always. I reminded her who I was. She remembered. I asked if she could clarify something about the contract, specifically whose name was actually on the booking agreement. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Then Courtney confirmed what I already knew but needed to hear. The contract was in my name. I was the primary client. Derek and Stephanie were listed as the event hosts, but all financial responsibility and decision-making power legally belonged to me. I asked what that meant in practical terms. Courtney, to her credit, was straightforward. It meant that as far as Rosewood Estate was concerned, this was my event. I had the right to make changes, including cancellation if necessary. Of course, she added quickly, cancellation this close to the date would mean forfeiting the deposit. I thanked her for clarifying. She asked if there was a problem. I said no, just wanted to make sure I understood everything. We hung up. For the first time in months, I felt something other than hurt. I felt a spark of control. I spent the rest of the day thinking through my options. I could pay the additional money and show up to a wedding where I clearly wasn't wanted, smile through photos, and pretend everything was fine. I could refuse to pay and let them figure it out, which would probably lead to the wedding being canceled and me being blamed forever. Or I could wait, see what happened, see if anyone in my family would actually stand up for me before it was too late. Friday morning, one day before the wedding. My phone stayed silent. No calls from Derek, no texts from my parents, nothing from Stephanie. It was like I didn't exist. I went to work but couldn't concentrate. Every time my phone buzzed with a work email, my heart jumped. By noon, I'd accepted the truth. Nobody was going to reach out. Nobody was going to apologize or include me or even acknowledge what was happening. I was on my own. I left work early, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely a lie. My head pounded with stress and sadness and anger all mixed together. I drove home in a daze, barely remembering the route. Once inside my apartment, I changed into comfortable clothes and sat on my couch. I pulled up Instagram one more time. Derek had posted a photo from the rehearsal dinner the night before. Stephanie's family filled the frame, everyone dressed up and smiling. The caption read, "Surrounded by love and family the night before we say I do." I wasn't in the photo. I hadn't been invited to the rehearsal dinner. Saturday, the wedding day. I woke at 6 in the morning, even though I'd barely slept. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock that afternoon. I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan rotate slowly, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with this day. I hadn't bought a dress, hadn't arranged transportation, hadn't received any details about timing or where family should arrive or anything else that an immediate family member would normally know. Around 7, I got up and made coffee. The apartment felt too quiet. I turned on the TV for background noise but couldn't focus on whatever morning show was playing. My phone sat on the coffee table screen dark. No messages, no missed calls. I picked it up and scrolled through my contacts, hovering over Derek's name. What would I even say? I set the phone back down. By noon, I'd accepted that I wasn't going to the wedding. Not because I was being petty or trying to make a statement, but because showing up uninvited to an event where I clearly wasn't wanted would be humiliating. I'd maintained enough dignity to recognize when I was beaten. I changed into yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt. If this was how my relationship with my brother was going to end, at least I'd be comfortable. At 1:15, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice, tense and professional. "Aaron, this is Courtney, the wedding planner." My stomach dropped. I said yes, this was Aaron. Courtney said she was calling because there had been a situation and she needed to inform me of something. I waited, my free hand gripping the arm of the couch. Courtney took a breath, then spoke in a rush. Stephanie had asked her to call me. She wanted Courtney to tell me that my family had officially decided to cancel my invitation to the wedding. The words hung in the air between us. Even though I'd expected this hearing, it stated so bluntly felt like being slapped. But Courtney wasn't finished. She continued, her voice strained with obvious discomfort. However, they wanted me to know they were keeping the $65,000 deposit. Stephanie had told Courtney to tell me it was a generous gift from me to them. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The audacity of it was stunning. They were officially uninviting me and simultaneously claiming my money as a gift. Courtney jumped back in, clearly uncomfortable. She said she was just the messenger, that she personally thought this was unprofessional, but Derek and Stephanie had insisted she make this call. I found my voice. I asked why they couldn't call me themselves. Courtney said Derek had told her it would be too emotional if he called directly. Too emotional. My brother didn't have the courage to tell me himself that I was uninvited from the wedding I'd paid for. He'd made his wedding planner do it. Something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, but underneath it rose something stronger. Anger. Clear, bright anger. And with it, clarity. I asked Courtney to hold on a moment. She said okay, sounding confused. I walked to my home office and opened my laptop, found the digital copy of the venue contract I'd saved, opened it and scanned through to the relevant sections. Everything I needed was right there in black and white. My name, my signature, my financial guarantee. I went back to the phone. I asked Courtney a question. When she'd made the booking whose name had gone on the contract, there was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling again. Courtney said my name was on the contract. I asked her to confirm that I was listed as the primary client, not Derek or Stephanie. Another pause. Then, yes, she confirmed it. I was the client of record. Everything was under my name. I felt something like calm wash over me. I told Courtney that was interesting. She asked why. I said, keeping my voice steady, that Stephanie had made a significant miscalculation. Courtney asked what I meant. I said that yes, they could keep the deposit if they wanted. After all, I was the one who paid for the venue. The silence on the other end told me Courtney was putting the pieces together. Her voice changed, became more alert. She asked what exactly I was saying. I said that it was fine they were keeping my money and canceling my invitation, but they seemed to have forgotten one crucial detail. I was the one who booked the venue. My name was on the contract, which meant I was also the one who could cancel the venue. The silence stretched out for several seconds. Then Courtney said very quietly, "Oh my God." I asked if she wanted to clarify something with Derek and Stephanie before we continued this conversation. Courtney said she needed to put me on hold. I said that was fine. I'd wait. Muzak filled my ear, some instrumental version of a pop song I vaguely recognized. I sat down at my desk, my heart pounding, but my head clear. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting to what someone else wanted. I was making my own choice. 3 minutes passed. 4. At 5 minutes, Courtney came back on the line. Her voice was higher pitched than before, stressed. She said she'd just spoken with Derek and Stephanie. They wanted to talk to me. I asked if they wanted to talk or if they wanted me to quietly accept being used and disrespected. Courtney didn't answer that. She said they were very upset and wanted to resolve this. I said I'd be happy to talk to them. She said she'd transfer me. More hold music. Then Derek's voice, loud and panicked. "Aaron, what the hell are you doing?" I kept my voice level. I said I was exercising my rights as the person who paid for the venue. Derek said I couldn't do this, that there were 200 people coming in less than 3 hours. I pointed out that those 200 people apparently didn't include me. Derek said that was Stephanie's decision, that she'd felt uncomfortable with me there. I asked why I should care about Stephanie's comfort when she'd never cared about mine. Derek's voice cracked. He said I was his sister, that he was begging me not to do this. I asked where that sisterly consideration had been for the past 6 months, when I wasn't invited to the bridal shower, when my cousins were cut from the guest list, when nobody sent me an invitation or included me in any planning, when they'd upgraded the wedding on my dime without asking, when they'd had their wedding planner call to uninvite me while keeping my money. The line went quiet. Then Stephanie's voice, tearful but with an edge of anger. "This is my wedding day. You can't do this to me." I said I wasn't doing anything to her. I was making a decision about an event that I had paid for and legally contracted. Stephanie said it was blackmail. I corrected her. It was consequences. There's a difference. She started to say something else, but then I heard muffled sounds like she'd covered the phone to talk to someone else. Derek came back on. His voice was different now, desperate and small. "What do you want, Aaron?" I sat back in my chair. That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? I thought about it for a moment. I didn't actually want to ruin their wedding. Despite everything, Derek was still my brother. But I wanted them to understand that you can't treat people this way. That family means something, or it should. That love and support have to go both ways. I told Derek I'd think about it. He said there wasn't time to think, that the wedding was in 2.5 hours. I said then he'd better give me a reason to let it happen. He started talking fast, making promises. They'd invite me back. They'd save me a seat. They'd make sure I was in the family photos. I cut him off. I said I'd already been humiliated enough. I didn't want to show up as an afterthought to a wedding where I wasn't wanted. What I wanted was a real apology and acknowledgement of how they'd treated me. Stephanie got back on the phone. She was crying now, her words coming out between sobs. She said she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she shouldn't have excluded me. I asked what exactly she was sorry for. She stumbled through an explanation about being stressed and not thinking clearly. I asked if she was sorry for her actions or sorry that those actions had consequences. She didn't have an answer for that. I heard my mother's voice in the background demanding to know what was happening. Then Dad's voice, calmer but firm, more muffled conversation. Then my father was on the phone. He asked me what was going on. I explained calmly and clearly everything that had happened over the past 6 months. The exclusion, the manipulation, the financial exploitation, the final insult of being uninvited while they kept my money. Dad listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said I was right, that what they'd done was wrong, that he and Mom had seen it happening and hadn't said anything because they didn't want to cause conflict. He apologized for that. He said they'd failed me as parents by not standing up for me. Hearing those words broke something in me. I started crying, which I hadn't let myself do until that moment. Dad asked what I needed. I wiped my eyes and tried to think practically. I didn't want to cancel the wedding. That would hurt too many innocent guests who'd done nothing wrong. But I needed Derek and Stephanie to understand the gravity of what they'd done. I told Dad I wanted a written apology from both of them. A real one, not a panicked text. I wanted public acknowledgement at the wedding that I'd paid for the venue with a genuine thank you. And I wanted $50,000 of my deposit returned within 30 days. I'd keep $15,000 as my actual gift to them. Dad asked if that was negotiable. I said no. Derek got back on the phone. He said they didn't have $50,000. I said that wasn't my problem. They could borrow it from our parents, take out a loan, figure it out. But those were my terms. Take them or leave them. Derek said it was blackmail. I said it was the cost of treating family like garbage. He could call it whatever he wanted. Stephanie said something in the background that I couldn't make out. Derek told me to hold on. More muffled voices, some of them raised. I could hear my mother saying something about family forgiveness. Courtney's voice joined the mix, probably explaining the legal reality of the situation. I sat at my desk watching the clock on my computer screen count down the minutes until the ceremony was supposed to start. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 minutes, Derek came back. His voice was defeated. He said they agreed, all of it, the apology, the acknowledgement, the money. I asked him to put it in writing and email it to me in the next hour. He said they would. I said I'd be waiting. If I didn't receive it, I'd call Rosewood and cancel. He said they'd send it. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my home office shaking. I'd actually done it. I'd stood up for myself in the most dramatic way possible. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me felt powerful. Mostly, I felt exhausted. My phone buzzed almost immediately with texts from my mother, from Derek, from people I could only assume were Stephanie's family or friends who'd somehow gotten my number. I ignored all of them. I waited for the email. 43 minutes later it arrived. A scanned document with both Derek's and Stephanie's signatures. The apology was awkward and clearly written under duress, but it hit the main points. They acknowledged excluding me. They acknowledged their behavior was hurtful. They committed to returning $50,000 in monthly payments starting in 30 days. They agreed to publicly thank me at the reception. I read it 3 times, then saved it to multiple locations. This was my insurance policy. I called Courtney. She answered immediately. I told her the wedding could proceed. Everything was resolved. The relief in her voice was palpable. She thanked me and said she'd make sure everything ran smoothly. I said I was sure she would. We hung up. I sat in my apartment listening to the silence. The wedding would happen. Derek and Stephanie would get their perfect day. But it wouldn't be the same as they'd planned. They'd know, and everyone there would know, that I'd held the power and chosen to use it. I didn't go to the wedding, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't want to be there. Some bridges are better left standing, but that doesn't mean you have to walk across them. I spent that evening at Laura's house drinking wine and watching old movies. She kept checking if I was okay. I told her honestly that I didn't know yet. But I knew I'd done the right thing. The weeks that followed were strange. The first payment of $5,000 hit my account exactly 30 days after the wedding, as promised. Derek sent a text with the confirmation number. No other message. I replied with a simple thanks. We didn't talk beyond that for a while. My mother called several times trying to smooth things over, suggesting family dinners that I politely declined. I needed space, and for once, I was taking it. 2 months after the wedding, I started seeing a therapist. Not because I thought I'd done anything wrong, but because I realized I needed help setting boundaries with my family. Years of being the accommodating daughter and sister had left me without a clear sense of where I ended and their expectations began. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Reeves, helped me understand that loving someone doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, that being family doesn't give people a free pass to use you. 3 months after the wedding, Stephanie sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter, not an email or text. It arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. In it, she apologized again. This time, the words felt more genuine. She admitted that she'd been jealous of my relationship with Derek, intimidated by my independence and success. She said she'd felt like she had to compete with me for his attention and had handled it in the worst possible way. She didn't make excuses, just acknowledged her behavior and its impact. I read that letter several times. I didn't respond right away, but I kept it. 4 months after the wedding, Derek called me. It was the first real conversation we'd had since everything happened. He sounded different, humbler. He said he'd been thinking a lot about how he'd treated me over the years, not just during the wedding planning. He admitted he'd always taken my support for granted, assumed I'd always be there to help him no matter what. He said watching me almost cancel his wedding had been the wake-up call he needed to realize how selfish he'd been. He asked if we could try to rebuild our relationship. I said maybe, but it would take time. The monthly payments continued like clockwork. $5,000 on the same date each month. By month 8, my savings account had recovered significantly. More importantly, my sense of self-worth had recovered even more. I learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize my own needs, to understand that real family, the kind worth having, respects boundaries and reciprocates love. A year after the wedding, things had shifted. Derek and I talked on the phone every couple of weeks. The conversations were still sometimes awkward, but there was an honesty that hadn't been there before. He'd gotten a steady job and was working to pay off the loan he'd taken to repay me. Stephanie and I had met for coffee twice. The first time was tense. The second time was better. I wouldn't call us friends, but we were finding a way to coexist. My parents had apologized, truly apologized for not protecting me when they should have. We were rebuilding trust slowly. I learned something crucial through all of this. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. There's a difference between being giving and being a doormat, between supporting family and enabling their worst behavior, between love and being taken advantage of in love's name. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn approval and belonging through what I could give. The wedding situation taught me that belonging should never come with a price tag. Looking back now, I don't regret what I did. Not the ultimatum, not the threat to cancel, not enforcing consequences for how I was treated. Some people might think I went too far. That family should forgive and forget. But forgiveness doesn't mean accepting ongoing disrespect. It means releasing the anger while maintaining healthy boundaries. I forgave Derek and Stephanie, but I also made sure they understood that my love and support come with the expectation of basic decency in return. The money was never really about the money. It was about what the money represented, my value in their eyes, whether I mattered as a person or just as a resource. When they tried to keep my deposit while uninviting me, they made their choice clear. I responded by making my own choice equally clear. I had worth with or without their approval. I deserved respect with or without their inclusion, and I was willing to walk away from relationships that didn't honor that. That wedding day sitting in my apartment while 200 people celebrated without me, I felt a lot of things. Sadness, anger, loss. But also, underneath it all, relief. Relief that I'd finally stopped shrinking myself to fit into spaces where I wasn't wanted. Relief that I'd chosen my own dignity over their comfort. relief that I'd learned this lesson before wasting more years accommodating people who didn't truly value me. Derek and Stephanie are still married. From what I hear, they're doing well. I'm genuinely happy for them. My relationship with my brother will never be what it was before, but maybe that's okay. Maybe it was broken long before the wedding. Maybe all of this just forced us to acknowledge the cracks and decide whether to repair them properly or keep pretending they didn't exist. We're choosing repair. It's slow, imperfect work, but it feels more real than what we had before. My mother still sometimes suggests I should have just gone to the wedding, that I made things harder than they needed to be. But Dad backs me up now. He reminds her that sometimes the hard thing and the right thing are the same thing, that protecting me should have mattered more than avoiding conflict. Mom is trying to understand. It's not easy for her to acknowledge that she prioritized keeping peace over keeping me safe from hurt. But she's trying, and that matters. I've learned to recognize red flags in relationships, now family or otherwise, when someone consistently prioritizes their wants over your needs, when support only flows one direction, when love comes with conditions and price tags, when you're valued for what you provide rather than who you are. These are signs to step back, reassess, and enforce boundaries. It's not mean, it's self-preservation. Sometimes people ask if I'd do it differently, knowing what I know now. The answer is complicated. Would I have preferred to have a good relationship with my brother and future sister-in-law from the start? Of course. Would I have preferred not to need such a dramatic confrontation? Absolutely. But given the situation as it actually unfolded, given their choices and actions, I wouldn't change my response. Because that response taught me something invaluable about my own strength and worth. The wedding situation gave me a gift, though it didn't feel like one at the time. It gave me permission to stop being the person everyone could rely on to sacrifice herself, to stop measuring my value by how much I could give, to stop accepting crumbs of affection while providing full meals of support. It gave me the clarity to see which relationships in my life were reciprocal and which were extractive, and it gave me the courage to demand better. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not give endlessly, but know when to stop, and maybe that's what real family should understand. Love isn't measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how much you respect each other in the process. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family took your generosity for granted, where you gave and gave until there was nothing left and still it wasn't enough? Drop a comment below and share your experience. I'd love to hear how you handled it. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and finding your strength. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries even with family. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you deserve respect, love, and appreciation just for being you, not for what you can provide. Take care of yourselves and remember that your worth is not negotiable.